On your Wednesday episode of Locked On Raptors, on yesterday's show, I dug into why I think the Raptors should be looking at extending Pascal Siakam instead of trading him. And today we dig into what the path for the Raptors could look like if in fact they do go ahead and give the Siakam-Scotty Barnes pairing a shot to flourish going forward. We'll get into that plus so much more on a Wednesday episode. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, July the 12th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 9 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Twitter at WoodleySean. You can follow the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors. And of course, you can join the Locked On Raptors Discord server. The link is in the description. We got a whole host of new folks in there yesterday. Got about 150 people just hanging out, talking Raptors. It's a friendly environment. When there's disagreement, it's pleasant disagreement. It's kind of this weird basketball talk utopia on the internet. Come hang out. Link is in the description as always. Would love to see you jump on in there and entertain my very, very silly fake trades that I drop in there all the time. Stuff that I'm not even brave enough to put on the podcast. Come on and jump on in. Also, please subscribe, follow, rate, review, all that good stuff. It's always appreciated when you support the show and when you make us your first listen of the day. Thank you so much for doing that. Shouts to our everydayers tuning in as well. If you're an everyday listener of the show, let us know in the comments so we know and can put you on a watch list and get you some help. But thank you for being here. And let's dive in, shall we? We got a lot to get to today. Coming up later, we're going to dig into some of my ideal guard targets for the Raptors. Whether or not Pascal Siakam is on the team or not, the Raptors don't have enough guard play right now. I think we can all probably agree with that. And so we're going to dig into some of my ideal targets for the Raptors and, why I think the Raptors should be doing everything they can to get just some more guard play on this roster. We're also going to close out the show as our pal Doug Branson from Locked On Hornets is going to stop by. Give us a little Jalen McDaniels 101, a pretty interesting player, I think, and sort of tangentially tied to a lot of the Raptors' offseason decision-making as well, with him coming in the door and creating a bit of a glut at the position where the Raptors have the most glut, probably in the entire NBA. So we'll get to that. But let's start with sort of a piggyback on yesterday's conversation. If you listened to yesterday's show, which everydayers did, and we love you. If you haven't yet, go check it out. I dug into the reasons why I think the Raptors should be looking at extending Pascal Siakam instead of trading him right now. You know, the laundry list of reasons, you know, the Coles notes of it. The Hawks and Pacers, as the two reported teams, don't exactly have prime offers to put on the table and might not be incentivized to go fully in on a Pascal offer because of the 1 year left on his contract and all that hangs, sort of unanswered there. There's, of course, the fact that Pascal Siakam is very good and wants to be in Toronto, and you should probably not take that lightly when you have a in their prime All-NBA player on the roster. Just because he's not the number one on a championship team doesn't mean you have to go jettison him off and wait for the next guy to come along. Having Pascal Siakam is good for your basketball team. Kind of full stop. There's plenty of reasons for it. Also, if you were to trade him now, you're not going to get nearly as much value as you might if you, say, revisit it 2-3 years down the road with him on a new contract, a contract that will probably age quite well as the salary cap raises 10% year over year in the coming years here. So that's the spiel as to why Pascal should probably be extended, at least in my mind, and why I think if the Raptors trade him right now for something less than a stellar package, it will go down as a massive organizational failure. With that, I feel like I should probably lay out a little bit more of my plan in my mind's eye over what I think the Raptors could or should do if, in fact, they do just extend Pascal and keep him around. The thing is next year is going to be rough, I think, no matter what happens. Losing Fred VanVleet was tough, and not replacing him with the requisite three-point shooting. I know he shot 34% last year. Don't have to tell me, but his pull-up shooting was still a real threat. He was effective on pull-ups. His volume's incredible, and he is treated as a real shooter by opposing teams. Thus, the Raptors lost shooting. They replaced him with Dennis Schroeder, someone who does not shoot at high volume or accuracy. And there's just not a lot in terms of guys who can both dribble and shoot on this roster. There's nothing right now in terms of guys who have both of those qualities. And so the Raptors are in this weird sort of space where their roster for next year might honestly be too misshapen for them to be seriously competitive, which is a shame. That said, I think there's a pathway here where you keep Pascal and Scottie together, a duo who have, actually had tangible success playing with one another, off of one another. Their strengths, yes, they have some overlap in terms of the things they do well, but they also have strengths that do not overlap and I think can blend together quite nicely as sort of the dueling heads of the snake, as it were. And we saw it work in 21-22, which, by the way, later this week, Jamar Hines and I think we're going to go back and look at that back part of 21-22 with Scottie and Pascal driving the bus and sort of see, is there anything there that's real, anything that wasn't real? Was it all fool's gold? We'll revisit that coming up later this week. But when it comes to the next steps, if they do extend Pascal and give this Scottie Pascal thing a chance to work, I think you have to sort of work with a multi-year sort of time frame in mind of reshaping the roster and reimagining it in a way that it makes sense around those two guys. Those guys could help things along if there's, shooting increases from either of them. I think Pascal stands a pretty good chance of kind of rediscovering his earlier career form as like a corner shooter, playing off of Scottie a little bit more. I'm pretty bullish on that. He's had good numbers from the corners, et cetera, et cetera. But still, even with their shooting upticks, you're going to have rosters that make sense around two guys with such particular skill sets. It's just life in the NBA. All players have their own sort of particularities when it comes to which players they're going to play best with. And so I think if you keep Pascal, the work begins on reshaping the roster. And that is where my eyes sort of begin to turn towards OG Anunoby. And look, in a perfect world, I don't think the Raptors should trade OG Anunoby. I think OG Anunoby is an excellent fit next to Scottie Barnes, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. OG Anunoby is the type of one-of-one defender who you trade and then spend 20 years thinking, man, it would have been nice if we didn't trade that guy. There's 100%, that's absolutely on the table as an outcome here if you trade OG. That said, if you look at it just on its face, between Pascal, OG, Scottie, if the sort of common sense is that you have to pick two of those guys to roll forward with, why isn't it Scottie and Pascal? Pascal's the best player of the bunch by a mile right now. It's not even close. He's the best player. He's 29. Yes, that's a little longer in the tooth than the other two guys, but I'm honestly not all that compelled by the Scottie Siakam are not on the same timeline thing, because if you lock in Pascal Siakam for the next 5 years, at some point their timelines will overlap pretty nicely. They will be at something close to their peak. I don't see Pascal having some precipitous drop-off in the way he plays over the next life of this contract. And to me, if you can make those two work together, that's just a talent-wise thing. That's the best thing you can do as far as choosing two of these three wing types who kind of overlap with one another. OG obviously is a better defender than either Barnes or Scott or Pascal. He's a better shooter than both of them as well. He's a seamless fit in basically any team. But are you going to keep him? Is it possible he's a flight risk in a year? If he doesn't get the role that he's reported to want, which, I think my mileage varies on how much that concerns me, honestly. I just think, playing within a real team with actual role definition and a hierarchy and some offensive sets, OG is going to get his looks next year. OG is going to get his money no matter what. I think, it's a lot of sort of, does OG want to be Jeremy Grant and all this stuff? Maybe that's what he wants, but you have to kind of bake all of it in. And are you worried that OG is going to leave in a year? And having just lost Fred VanVleet in free agency, I think you got to be even more worried about it than you typically would be, even though the Raptors have a history of keeping their own guys more often than not over the last 10 years. It's certainly a thing you got to worry about. And so if you can lock in Siakam for an extension this summer and just say, you're on our team, dude, we're rolling with you, and we're going to build this thing around you, then I do think it becomes maybe prudent to look at OG as the vehicle by which you begin reassembling the roster around Scottie and Pascal in a way that makes sense. And you don't do it just for anything. I think you have to do it for a trade that's sort of like a team doing a consolidation trade of good players to get OG on their team as like the final finishing piece where you get real players back. I'm not really particularly interested in like a boatload of picks, honestly, as I'm trying to build this roster in a way that makes sense to facilitate Scottie's development and to best accentuate all that Pascal Siakam does well. I pitched a trade yesterday on Twitter. And I think it's a good one because most Raptors fans hated it, and every Knicks fan I showed it to hated it as well, which tells me it's a pretty good fake trade. And it's not saying that this has to be the exact trade or anything like that, but is this sort of the sort of blueprint of what an OG trade could look like to better set up the Scottie Pascal duo for the long term? The idea I had is OG and Thad Young to the Knicks. For Evan Fournier, it's contract matching. It's not anything. He's got a team option after next year. He's a $19 million expiring. But the two pieces coming back would be Immanuel Quickley and Quentin Grimes. And I know it's like, oh my God, OG, there's no picks involved, and Quickley and Grimes, they're unproven. Well, like, they're good players. I'm sorry to say. If you haven't watched the Knicks lately, Quentin Grimes is the type of player who's going to be on championship teams for the next 10 years. The dude is just like an incredible wing defender who shoots 39% from three. He shot 64% on twos last year. Quentin Grimes rocks. If you can get Quentin Grimes on your team, you should try to do that. And Immanuel Quickley does a notable thing, which is dribble and shoot. Would be the instantly best guard on the Raptors. He would be their starting point guard, and I think would be an incredible fit next to Scottie Barnes as someone who can play either on or off the ball. Sort of think what the dream was with like Kobe Bufkin, for example, as I outlined why he would be a great fit next to Scottie Barnes. I think a very similar idea with Immanuel Quickley, who, can have the ball in his hands, can work off the ball and shoot 37% as he has throughout his career so far. I think there's a lot there, and Quickley in a starting role at just 23, I feel like there's a jump to be taken there for Quickley as well. The Knicks, their mileage may vary on this one. They love Quentin Grimes. OG might be a bit of a clunky fit next to RJ Barrett, all this stuff, but that's the type of trade that might be the next step if Siakam is to be resigned. And frankly, it's just like a talent management thing. I think Scottie plus Pascal plus whatever you can get for OG is probably better talent-wise than Scottie plus OG plus whatever you get for Pascal at this diminished value that he has because he's got just 1 year left on his deal. And so I kind of think maybe that's the way to go. As much as I think trading OG comes with all sorts of risk and pain, you have to factor in the 1 year left on his deal as well and the potential flight risk of him. If you can lock in Siakam for 5 years, you say goodbye to that flight risk, and you know that he's going to be there, and you can let this Siakam Barnes thing grow and germinate into something over the next few years as Scottie kind of moves into his early prime. That's the soapbox for today. We're going to come back on the other side, get into some ideal guard targets. I want to talk a little bit more about Immanuel Quickley, who I think, would he be a perfect addition to this team, and someone that I think, even if it's not an OG trade, I think the Raptors should be calling the Knicks up to ask about, because I'm not sure where Quickley's getting his money from the Knicks right now, either in a pretty loaded backcourt. We'll get to that and some other names, Ayo Dosunmu, Cole Anthony, in just one moment. Before we do that, however, got to tell you about our good friends over at Bird Dogs, who make the most comfortable shorts in the game. I don't know how else to say it. They are unbelievably comfortable, and they look fantastic. And for me, you guys know if you're a listener to this show, I'm a hot boy. I really don't do well in the heat. I wear shorts basically from April through September, sometimes into October, because heat just does not agree with me whatsoever. And Bird Dogs are great because they're breathable, they're light, and they're futuristic because they have a built-in comfort lining that replaces the need for underwear. Who wants to be wearing an extra layer of stuff in the summertime? The comfort layer is underwear in the future, baby. So go check them out. Bird Dogs, you're not going to want to take them off. They're super comfortable. Go to birddogs.com/LockedInNBA or enter the promo code LockedInNBA for a free Yeti-style tumbler. That's birddogs.com/LockedInNBA or the promo code LockedInNBA for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. Go check them out. All right, let's continue on here. Your first listen of the day. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thanks to everyone who's been supporting the show of late. It's been a nice little run. Lots of new YouTube subscribers, lots of dear pals jumping into Discord. It's been lovely to chat with y'all and all that good stuff. So thank you for supporting, and we'll be back again with more stuff as the week goes on. But again, if you haven't listened yet, go listen to my show yesterday, where we dug into the Pascal Siakam of it all, and why I think trading him would just be so bad at this point. It makes sense. There's reasoning behind it. It's just reasoning that is sensible because of a lot of mistakes that have led us to this point. Anyway, let's get into guard target, shall we? I've been kind of promising this one for a few days, and keep coming back to. Let's just like live in the reality where Pascal Siakam's on the team right now. How about that? Like, we don't know a trade's going to happen. Maybe it does. It changes the context of everything. But I do think there's a pretty inarguable thing about this Raptors team, and it is that they do not have enough guard play right now at all. Guards are important. Getting into the teeth of the defense and quickness and penetration and shooting and ball handling and playmaking, all historically very important skills to have in a basketball team. It's kind of like what we talked about last year when the Raptors had no center. 100 years of basketball being played tells us that having people who can do the things that centers do is important for success on a basketball court. The exact same applies, except maybe even more so when it comes to players who can dribble and shoot at the same time. The Raptors don't have that right now. I know they're going to funnel a lot into Scotty Barnes and ask him to create a bunch. I shared my sort of, reservations about that because I think Scotty Barnes, while really talented and absolutely with superstar potential, if all things break right, his 90th and up percentile outcome is, oh God, this guy's a real problem who's like changing the championship picture. That's a lot. There's a lot of ground between there and where he is right now. And shooting is just like a massive obstacle to him getting there. He doesn't shoot right now. I don't expect him to walk into next season as a 36% three-point shooter. If he does, incredible, amazing, but you can't plan for the best case scenario. You have to plan for the realistic one, and the realistic one is that if Scotty Barnes' three-point shooting, his pull-up game ever comes along, it's going to take multiple years of refinement for that to really kind of hit its peak, and I'm not expecting it for year 3. So with that, there's a limitation onto how much you can actually run with Scotty as your main point of attack creator, right? He's not going to force teams to fight over screens. Teams are going to go under on him. They're going to pack the paint. It's going to be cramped. It's going to be nasty. It's going to be clog ball. And you have to have more just dynamism built into your offense through guards who can dribble and shoot at the same time more often than not. And so I got a bit of a list of guys who I think the Raptors should be going after, whether or not Siakam's on the team or not. Yes, maybe a Siakam deal helps address the guard problem, but I don't think you can have too many guards. And right now they have exactly one point guard, and it is Dennis Schroeder, who does not shoot threes and can't finish at the rim. Finished worse at the rim last year than Fred VanVleet. People forget that. And so the guys I have kind of listed, I mentioned Immanuel Quickley. God, I really like Immanuel Quickley. And look, maybe your mileage varies. That's totally fine. I know the Knicks necessarily aren't like the highest on Quickley, just from what I've, speaking to our pals at Locked On Knicks, etc. I think a lot of Knicks fans are high on him. I don't know if the franchise necessarily values him in the same way. But last year, man, really good player. 15 points a game, 4 boards, 3.4 assists, shot 37% on threes, shot 52% on twos, and he's got a lot of pop to his game. He's an excellent on-ball defender as well, which would be a really nice thing to have, especially if, in theory, you're trading him for an OG Anunoby type package. Replacing one wing defender with another, obviously very different positions. No one's as good at defense as OG, but Quickley brings a lot of point of attack credibility in a defense. You run out like 2 point guards of Quickley and Schroeder as your main point of attack guys on defense. That's a pretty good starting point for your perimeter D. I just think, I know the playoffs weren't very friendly to Quickley. He's also 23 years old, and it's a tiny sample. I don't know how much you can really put stock into that. And I just think there's a lot of pop there, a lot of upside. And I think if you can go get Immanuel Quickley right now, I'd do it. He is probably, to me, the only guard out there right now who I'd feel comfortable parting with future draft capital to go and get. But like at some point, it's worth spending future draft capital to get players to pair with Scotty Barnes. And again, I think the pairing of Quickley with Scotty Barnes, Quickley with Pascal Siakam will be pretty awesome. And even if you have OG Anunoby on the team, your lineups make a lot more sense if Quickley OG is your starting backcourt because they both can shoot and Quickley can run pick and roll, can actually accentuate the best things about Jakob Poeltl as well. That's kind of a slept-on thing here. We talk a lot about the pairing with Scotty Barnes, but like whoever the Raptors have at guard, it's going to be paramount that they can establish pick and roll chemistry with Jakob Poeltl. And if you can't do that, or if you don't have the skills in your toolbox to weaponize a pick and roll big like Jakob Poeltl, then that's not going to get you a lot for your money on Jakob Poeltl either. So there's importance to this. I would be totally fine shipping out a 2026 first rounder or whatever for an Immanuel Quickley. There would have to be some sort of fiddling with the protections on the Spurs pick that's going out, I'm sure. But if you have Quickley on the team, I think not only does he bring a little bit of youth, a little bit of pop, a little bit of zip, a little bit of defense, but also I think there's a real case to be made that within a year or two, he could actually be just considered as a better overall player than Fred VanVleet. And I'm a Fred VanVleet guy, but Quickley brings a lot to the table and is just 23 years old. He is like far and away my number one guard target for the Raptors right now. We have a little bit of a a group in the Raptors, Locked On Raptors Discord called IQAnon, where we're very much in on Immanuel Quickley as a target for the Raptors. Come join us, will you? Going from there, I think the options get a little bit less sexy. You know, there's the Magic dudes who everyone is seemingly fawning over. Cole Anthony, Jalen Suggs, Markelle Fultz. You know, obviously they bring in Anthony Black. They don't have a ton of shooting on that roster. Maybe there's a way to sort of, kind of clear out some space for one of their guards by picking up one of them. I think Cole Anthony's my favorite of that bunch. He just feels like he has the most offensive pop to him. Suggs, I haven't seen it, and as much as I think he's going to be a very good defensive guard, I don't know if the offensive game is really there for me. That the pull-up doesn't seem like it's anywhere remotely close. He's not been terribly efficient. I'm not really seeing it with Suggs. By the way, good pick Raptors, not taking Jalen Suggs instead of Scotty Barnes. When Markelle Fultz, there's a lot to like. Very good defender. Has improved markedly as like a 2-point scorer. 3-point shooting wise, shot 31% last year. It was fine. I still, it's always in the back of my head that Markelle Fultz once forgot how to shoot for like 3 years, and that's tough to overcome. But I do think those Magic guys, one of them would be like a nice pickup. I think I'd rank them Anthony, Fultz, Suggs probably. And part of it is I don't think Fultz is terribly realistic. I think the Magic really value him, and so I don't think you're actually really getting into the conversation for him without giving up future draft capital, and I'd rather devote that draft capital to a Quickley type than a Markelle Fultz because of the shooting issues. Beyond that, you get Ayo Dosunmu, who I think is kind of the next guy down, and frankly, beyond that, it's pretty grim as far as options for the Raptors at guard. But we've heard that they've had some interest in Ayo. He is not yet signed with the Chicago Bulls. He's an RFA. Is there an offer sheet you can throw his way? Make a sign and trade and maybe send like a Precious Achiuwa back the other way. I know I mentioned that one yesterday or earlier this week, but I think that's actually pretty sensible. It clears out some of the glut of the same type forwards. Yes, there's the risk of Precious becoming awesome and you're worrying that you have given him away before he's really kind of figured things out, but also maybe he never figures things out on offense, and you're happy you got yourself Ayo Dosunmu, who's like a nasty on-ball defender, had a really excellent rookie season for the Bulls, maybe a bit overextended last year, went from 37% as a rookie from 3 down to 32% last year. That's not great, but he's also 22, 23, very young, and I think I'd be, again, not thrilled if Ayo Dosunmu is like the guard that the Raptors are starting games with next year, but I also think I'd be happier with that than I would be with Dennis Schroeder because of the upside, because there's actually some history of 3-point shooting there, and because of the defense he brings. Like, I think I'd be pretty all right with Ayo, but after that, it gets pretty grim, and I'm running out of like really good ideas for the Raptors to go try to address their guard issues. Just go get Immanuel Quickley, baby, and it's all easy. And yeah, I think as far as trade assets going out, first round pick for a Quickley type, I'd be totally fine with. He makes $4 million this year, then you're going to pay his next deal. I think you're perfectly happy to pay his next deal, as it will cover basically his entire prime. No issues there if that's the cost to acquire. With a guy like Dosunmu or Anthony, I think that's where Precious maybe comes in, maybe like a future second or something like that to grease the wheels. I think that's probably as far as I'd go. I'm not giving up a first-round pick for Cole Anthony, I don't think. But that's kind of where I'm at with guard targets. It's not the best. The Raptors need to do some work here, though, if they want to have a roster that makes any sense around whoever they end up having, whether it's just Scotty Barnes and OG, whether it's Scotty and Pascal, whether it's all three of them. This team is not going to work next year, and it's not going to be a very conducive developmental environment if you don't have a little bit more in terms of guard play on this roster to tie things together. That's my piece there. We're going to come back on the other side. I was speaking about the glut of big forward types on this Raptors team, and that glut has been created in large part by the addition of Jalen McDaniels. We're going to get on the other side into a chat with our pal Doug Branson from Locked On Hornets, all about Jalen McDaniels and what he brings as a player. Looking forward to this one. Doug coming up on the other side. Before we do that, however, today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. help. Therapy is a thing that a lot of people I know have had a lot of success with. It's really helped them with decision making and kind of just having someone to talk to get their thoughts and emotions out there into the world, for someone who's just there to listen and there to take in what you say and offer feedback and advice, totally unbiased, without agenda, without their own baggage. It's a really wonderful thing, and it doesn't have to be because you suffered serious trauma. It could just be for the daily trials and tribulations of life. Trusting yourself to make decisions that align with your values is like anything. The more you practice it, the easier it gets. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, let's get to it. Our chat with Doug Branson of Locked On Hornets, all about Jalen McDaniels. All right, joining me now is our dear pal from Locked On Hornets, Doug Branson, who was along to give us a little bit of a schooling on Jalen McDaniels, one of the newest Toronto Raptors, and I don't know, their 14th 6'9" forward of the last 3 years they've had in this position. Obviously, new guy, similar dimensions, but we're going to get the sort of lowdown on what to expect from Jalen McDaniels, who I don't know about anybody else, but I have talked myself fully into just being his brother as far as upside, because it's really easy to do that when you look at the dimensions and look at the sort of three-point shooting upside and all of that. Doug, let's begin with, obviously the Hornets trade Jalen McDaniels at the deadline. The Raptors were rumored to be kind of in on that around the time, that time as well. What was the Hornets fan reaction to Jalen McDaniels being cast aside by a team that is not very good? Is he someone that was kind of viewed as maybe a lost developmental opportunity? Were people happy to see him gone? I think to get a good read on a player, how did the fans of the team he previously played for feel about his departure is usually a pretty good place to start.
Yeah, I think it was generally positive, and generally viewed as a successful player development story for the Charlotte Hornets. But I think also most fans understood that the Hornets needed to do something to get a little worse, because by the time the trade deadline rolled around, the Charlotte Hornets, the wheels had come off the Hornets season due to a number of injuries, and then players would heal, and then they would get re-injured. And they had just lost so much, especially LaMelo Ball. They had lost so much offense that there was really just no hope for the season. And so when you got to that point of the trade deadline, they get rid of Plumlee, they get rid of McDaniels to essentially give Steve Clifford less tools to accidentally win basketball games as they turn their focus to getting a better draft pick. So, I think the reaction to Jalen McDaniels was nuanced, which is rare in sports. People are generally super high or super low, but I mean, my read on it was that people understood the move, while at the same time being disappointed, because I think a lot of fans saw promise in Jalen McDaniels.
Yeah, I mean that's the how to be a fan, is to see promise in a dude and get duped by it more often than not. With Jalen, obviously, he had a pretty long road to becoming a regular NBA player. I remember I was doing a Raptors 905 G League game before the pandemic, and calling a Jalen McDaniels game in which he was pretty unnoticeable, and to kind of move himself up into rotation player for, a Sixers team that, had designs on winning a championship. Pretty impressive considering, where he was sort of at a starting point. What is sort of, to you, the best thing Jalen McDaniels brings to the table? The Raptors bring him into the team. They're trying to find, okay, let's accentuate the strengths here. This is a thing Darko Rajakovic, the new coach, has talked about a lot, is what does this guy do well? How can we sort of amplify that when he's on the floor? What would you say is that thing for Jalen McDaniels?
Being long. His length is his strength, and getting into transition, finishing in transition, I would say were the things that really stood out to me, because I think all of the other skills that you would view as upside, so three-point shooting, defensive, upside because of the length, I think all of those things were a mixed bag during his time in Charlotte. And I do want to warn folks, if he did anything in Philadelphia that contradicts anything that I'm about to say, or if he got hurt in Philadelphia. Honestly, I don't know. Once you leave the Charlotte Hornets roster, you're dead to me. You don't exist anymore. I've got to talk about the third string center, so I can't keep, once you leave the Hornets orbit, I don't really know much of what happens to you until you come back and play the Hornets. But those skills were a little bit of a mixed bag. You get to the fourth quarter, he'd have a wide open 3-point shot from the corner, and he would miss it. There would be defensive possessions where you would go, oh man, he really jumped that passing lane. Great awareness, using that length, getting out into transition, great. And then he'd fall asleep and get back cut. So I would say like those skills that have upside, I think are still lacking a lot of consistency.
The 3-point shooting is like the thing that I'm fixated on, because you look at the free throw percentages. He's a career 78% 3-point or free throw shooter. The last couple of years, 84% last year, 73% the year before that. But 84 last year is like, okay, we're talking about something here. There's at least some touch to speak of. In the 21-22 season, he shot 38% on 2 attempts a game over 55 games. It's not like a crazy huge sample. Was 32% last year on more volume for the Hornets before getting dealt. Shot 40% on pretty small volume for the Sixers as well. Is there anything in that 38% season? Like, is there something that you think like clicked in there? Was it just like LaMelo Ball's playing more or whatever, so he's getting better looks? Like, what's your sort of read on the 3-point shooting upside here for McDaniels, and like, is there any chance that there is a 36, 37 sort of consistent shooting, mark to be had for this guy over, the course of a full season or two here?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible. I don't think the looks were any better or worse than they were in the previous season.
Right.
He did get some time with LaMelo Ball last season. But generally, when he took 3-point shots, they were catch and shoot opportunities where he was wide open. Because the Hornets last season, despite them being a terrible offensive team, they developed good opportunities. They just couldn't knock anything down. And so, I think Jalen McDaniels was a part of that. And I think there's a real case to be made that had he, been able to do that a little bit better, that they would have won a few more games. They may have, trudged through some of those injury issues with a little bit of a better record, and he may not have found himself traded. So certainly, I don't think there's anything wrong with the shot. I think there was all about shot making and opportunities to kind of change the narrative of a game. He was given those opportunities and wasn't able to convert. And so I think that was probably one of the more frustrating things with Jalen McDaniels generally was just that late game shot making.
Yeah, I mean, the Raptors had a lot of threes last year that they missed, not often created through good process, so the Hornets had them beat there. You're conjuring up images of like Mo Harkless and Al-Farouq Amino on those Blazers teams, sort of, if I'm trying to think of like a comp of, oh yeah, all this stuff looks great defense, can hit some threes now and then, but when you really need it, are those really the dudes you want taking your wide open threes? Maybe not. I don't think Jalen McDaniels is going to be in the position where he has to take all those wide open threes late in games in clutch moments. Thankfully, I think the Raptors should have, as much as their roster feels bereft of talent compared to what it's been in recent years, I don't think they'll be leaning on McDaniels for that. But I am pretty intrigued overall by like the package he brings. Is there anything that Raptors fans should know on or off the court that we haven't covered here about Jalen McDaniels? Something to keep an eye on, something that's fun about the dude? Like, does he have a secret talent that we don't know about yet? What you got on Jalen McDaniels?
Fun fact about Jalen McDaniels, the 2 seasons prior, he missed significant time due to an ankle injury. It was his first ankle injury in his basketball career, which I found mind-boggling. How
I had one on Saturday.
These days... Yeah, exactly. I go to the fridge at midnight and I tear an ACL. Right. I mean, so it's amazing, especially when you consider that so many of these modern guys, they play so many games now before they ever sniff an NBA minute, that he had not sustained an ankle injury before. He misses significant time and he comes back and you really couldn't tell. I mean, I think he does have that resilience. He's pretty even keel in interviews and on the floor too. Like, he just plays super smooth, super even keel. Doesn't get very emotional. no big highs, no big lows. I think he's got to work on his passing because that's part of the thing with Jalen is that if he's not making shots, it's tough for him to contribute offensively because his passing is, I would say, bad. And so, that's why those missed open three opportunities are frustrating. It's also a little strange because he's a good tough shot maker. Like when he gets into the lane, he can draw some contact, finish through that, go up for a short mid-range shot. Like he's pretty good tough shot maker. It was just those easy opportunities. So if he puts it all together, that's the thing. When Jalen McDaniels got traded, there was a part of me that said, this is the right move because the Hornets need to get worse. And removing Jalen McDaniels from the equation will make them worse. But then part of me is like, I am really scared that he's going to figure everything out and become someone else's treasure. So I think he has that opportunity with Toronto.
There's a history.
Oh, and by the way, when I heard the news that Toronto had acquired him, my reaction was, of course they did. Like I can't. It's like when you're watching a movie and there's a plot twist, and it's so you didn't anticipate it somehow, but it's so obvious that that's where the movie was going. Yeah, I mean Jalen McDaniels, Toronto, it's perfect.
Build the whole plane out of these 6'9" dudes, man. I guess that's just what they're planning to do, even though I don't think it really works. But what does work is San Diego State Aztecs forwards who wear number 2 playing for the Toronto Raptors. That's been pretty good in the past, so yeah. We'll see. Doug, thank you so much for hanging out, man. It was lovely to have you. Thanks for sharing your Jalen McDaniels intel. Where can people check out all your wonderful work?
Oh, I write stuff for every HornetsBoxScore.com. That's on the old Substack. And, of course, I join Walker Mail from WFNZ to yammer about the Hornets every day here on Locked On Hornets.
Excellent. Go check it all out. Doug's the best, and you're the best, folks, for tuning in. Thank you so much for being here today. We'll be back again tomorrow as I might take some of your listener questions and dig into some of the spiraling that's going on out there. Get as spirally as you can with your questions, and we'll have a little vent sesh tomorrow. Later this week as well, we're going to take a look at the 2021-22 Raptors and what went right for the Siakam and Barnes duo that could potentially lend to future success. We'll take a look back at that with Jamar Hines. In the meantime, thank you so much for tuning in. Subscribe, follow, rate, review, all that good stuff. We are available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube for free. And you can find us on Twitter, Instagram. We are in the Discord. The link is in the description. Come hang out in our Locked On Raptors Discord. It's a lovely little community building around the show. And with that, we'll send you off into the rest of your day. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.